Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. Over the past few years, we've seen a lot of new developments and releases in the film world, including new film stocks, but it's rare that we get new color negative film options announced, especially ones that are in fact a product not offered elsewhere, and also ones that don't feel experimental and actually perform quite well. Well, enter OptiColour 200. This is a recently announced 120 color negative film from OptiColour, and I was able to get my hands on a few rolls of this to test out over the past few weeks, and I have to say, the initial results seem very promising. So today in this video, we're going to take a look at this new film. I'm going to share my experience with you and some thoughts, including what this is, where it came from. We'll look at a bunch of images, talk about the look and kind of the performance of it, and then also look at some comparisons between scanners and different films, and also take a look at an exposure test. Okay, so to kick things off, we're going to answer the question right away. What is this film and where did it come from? Alright, so I'm going to see if I can kind of get all of this information out all at once. I'll try my best. But basically, OptiColour 200 is a medium format version of a color negative emulsion called Wolfen NC200. And if you haven't heard of that, this is a 35mm film that was released by a company called Oro, I think at the end of last year, and it's not even available yet. But that film is being made by or being coated by a company called Coat. And what happened is OptiColour, this lab out of Germany, approached Coat and wanted to see about bringing a new 120 color negative film option to market. So they decided to use the NC200 emulsion and make it into OptiColour 200, which is a 120 version. But beyond that, as they started to develop this medium format version, they made one significant change, in my opinion, and that is that they switched from a green base or green mask, which is what Wolfen NC200 uses, to a more traditional orange base or orange mask, which is much more common and also much more scanner friendly. And the first production run of this film has already been done, and you can buy it right now on their website. I think it's just under 10 euros per roll, but it is worth mentioning, and we'll dive into this a little deeper after. They did have some issues with the first production run, which caused two specific issues with this current batch of film. They're doing their master run in August and hoping to solve these problems, but yeah, like I said, we'll look at those in this video afterwards. OptiColour has been very transparent about everything with this film, including the issues. They have a very detailed post on their blog, and I'll link to that below. Okay, so let's talk about the look. So going into this, I was cautiously optimistic about this new film, just because other than Kodak Gold in 120 format, we haven't really seen any other medium format color negative films released that are either kind of usable in most situations or aren't just some like very niche, highly experimental thing. And I'll say right now, OptiColour 200, while it isn't a portrait, it's definitely going in the right direction. And all of the images I'm going to show you today, I scanned here at home on the Frontier SP3000, but later in the video, I'll show you a comparison with a few select frames that I did on my camera scanning setup, just so you can see kind of how they compare or how they differ. So this film certainly has a look to it, but it still feels somewhat natural. And I would say the biggest standout characteristic is that the shadows always seem to lean to the cooler blue side, and then in contrast, the highlights often lean warm. And all of the images that I shot always had this look to them, regardless of how I scanned the film or what environments I shot in. The colors themselves are quite pleasing, with certain ones like reds and greens being quite punchy, and then others feeling a little bit more muted. And I have to say, I enjoyed specifically how the greens rendered when scanned with the Fuji, also leaning quite cool. The way it handles contrast as well is pretty nice. It's a little more punchy maybe than normal, but it seems to give you flexibility. It was really only in like high contrast, kind of midday sun situations where the shadows felt like they were lacking a little bit of information. But I would be curious to just experiment, maybe giving this a little bit more exposure in the future. In a lot of the images I shot as well, there was, I would say, a decent amount of halation, specifically in like high contrast edges and specular highlights. And I wanted to point this out just because this is one of the problems that they had with this first run, and I'll go into detail after, but it is something that apparently will be fixed for the master run. When it comes to skin tones, the majority of the images that I shot were landscapes, but I did make a point of going to shoot just a couple self-portraits so I could get an initial idea for how skin comes across. And I will say, from these few tests, it actually looks nice straight from conversion. If anything, I have to pull just a bit of saturation out of the skin tones, but overall, I certainly wouldn't hesitate to photograph people with this. And on Optic Old School's Instagram page, they've been posting some work from some other photographers who've been testing the film. I've seen some portrait work on there that looks very, very nice. When it comes to sharpness and grain, I'll start by saying that the film was plenty sharp. I thought it looked really good. Even when scanned at high resolution, there was a lot of detail in the frames. But grain, on the other hand, was a little bit more aggressive than I thought it would be. It wasn't like over the top or unusable or anything like that, but if you were comparing it to, say, like Gold in 120, just a little bit more grain than I would have expected for a 200 speed film. Next up, we're going to take a look at some film comparisons and scanner comparisons, but before we do that, let's have to quickly talk about the sponsor today, which is Squarespace. So I've been using Squarespace for a number of years now, and what I love is how easy it is to build a clean, professional looking website for your photography that can grow with you. And to do this, you can use one of their pre-made templates, or you can use something like their blueprint builder, which allows you to build your site from scratch, but gives you really helpful tools like different page layouts, color palettes, and font pairings. It's also really easy to add, customize, and tweak your website. As an example, if I want to make a new gallery, I can simply click and drag to upload images and also to reorder them. But it's also great if you want to do more advanced things like, say, add an online shop. And at the start of this year, I decided to offer some limited prints for sale, and Squarespace made the entire process very streamlined, from setting up a shop page to payment processing and fulfillment. So check out squarespace.com today, sign up for a free trial, test it out. When you're ready to launch, you can use my link below to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. So this film definitely has a unique look to it, but unique isn't a bad thing. It's one of the things I love about working with film. Each different film stock is going to have its own kind of characteristics. It's just that OptiColour 200 is a little heavier or more defined. You take, say, a Portra, an Ektar, even a Gold, and they're all going to differ from one another, but could still be made to look, somewhat neutral. Whereas OptiColour 200, on the other hand, definitely has a different feel to it. And as an example, I have a couple frames here that I shot with some Kodak films from an X-Pan video I just released. And while I was on that trip, I brought along some OptiColour as well and shot a few of the same frames. And if we take a look at the first pair here, this X-Pan image was made with Portra 400, and you can see that the overall look and also the colors are kind of much more neutral or true, and the image also feels a bit softer. Whereas the OptiColour in comparison has kind of a very different and, like I said, more defined look to it. Again, those blue shadows and warm highlights. And it's the same with this second pair here. This time the X-Pan image was with Kodak Ultramax 400, but it's still similar to the difference we saw with the Portra image. Again, the Kodak film is a lot more balanced and neutral, where the OptiColour has that kind of stronger look to it. Okay, so I want to show you some comparisons now, and as mentioned, everything we saw was with the SP3000, but I used my Lumix S5 2X setup for some select frames as well, using Negative Lab Pro, just to see how this film kind of reacted to different scanning tools. But if we start by talking about the Frontier, I'll say that the film took maybe a little bit more work to correct than what I'm used to. Nothing too bad, but almost always I had to pull red from the conversion, and then also sometimes add a bit of yellow or add some warmth. And then with the camera scanning setup, I'll say that it was pretty much the exact same characteristics that I saw. Again, having to pull red or magenta, and then sometimes adding some warmth to the image as well. So which one did a better job? That's going to come down to personal preference. Really, the important part to me is that both tools kind of handled the film in the same way. And I think a big reason or a big help for that is, ditching that green masking and going to the orange. I also went and did an exposure test with this film, just a smaller one because I didn't have a ton of film available to me. So I just did normal exposure and then went down to 2 stops under and up to 3 stops over. And the results were kind of what I would expect from a color negative film. So 1 stop under was still very much usable. 2 stops under, not so much. The shadows started to get kind of really muddy or really thin. And then going the other direction, 1, 2, and even 3 stops over were completely fine. The shadows did open up and get a bit softer with more exposure, but there weren't any kind of like drastic or crazy color shifts that stood out. And to be honest, any kind of minor color shifts we're seeing is probably just due to the fact that each frame is being scanned individually on the Frontier. But I think moving forward, I would be tempted to shoot this film probably at ISO 100 just to give it a little bit more light. So as mentioned, there were a couple of issues that this current batch of film has. So when they were doing their first coating run, they ran into a problem with the anti-halation layer, and this led to 2 specific minor issues. So the first is the halation, like I mentioned earlier, and we saw it in a bunch of the images, you know, specular highlights, high contrast edges, there's a decent amount of halation. And the second thing, due to the same problem, is that these small little colored dots show up kind of like randomly and sporadically on frames. I didn't find this to be too big of a deal. I would just clone them out like dust, but I guess depending on where they show up or what you're shooting, it could potentially be a problem. But apparently when they go to do the master production run in August, these issues are going to be fixed. So I am looking forward to that. But this current price takes into account the issues. I think the master run rolls going to go up maybe closer to 12 euros. So to wrap things up, I'll say that I actually quite enjoyed this film. And you know, I'm typically someone who's pretty reserved with my film choices. I go for the more like neutral, boring options, you know, portraits for color negative or HP5 for black and white. So this isn't something that I would typically shoot with, but I will say it was really nice to see a film release that, again, wasn't over the top. It certainly has a look to it, and for people who like, you know, more of a look, I think it's going to be a great fit. But it's still workable in a lot of situations. And, you know, I use this across a bunch of different landscapes and a bunch of different weather, and there's a lot of images that I was quite happy with. So yeah, fun one to shoot. And I think, you know, getting that halation issue cleaned up will only help improve this and, you know, help bring it even a little bit more neutral. So I'm excited to see where things go. But I mean, regardless, just exciting to have another option on the market. And this is one that I think will be a nice addition. So anyways, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this look at OptiColour 200. Let me know if you have any questions. But other than that, just want to say thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.